What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 31 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest press conference information, answer some of your questions, and take a look at my own team as well. And I thought, what better place to start than Man United? Because a lot of people have got Bruno Fernandes, who has been playing in a deeper role recently, Luke Shaw, Marcus Rashford looking for injury updates, and quite a lot happened in the Sevilla game last night. So let's discuss it. We'll start with Marcus Rashford. In the post-match press conference with Ten Hag last night, I listened to it, and one of the journalists asked if Rashford might be available for the second leg against Sevilla. Now, that game would fall between game weeks 31 and 32, and Ten Hag said, there is a chance, yeah, but I can't confirm it in this moment. Now, when I tweeted that out, some people replied saying that, the result wasn't great last night, so he's probably just trying to make the fans happy, but I kind of take him at his word, and I think that's a positive update, because originally, when he was asked about Rashford, he said he's going to be out for a few games. Now, what a few means will differ from person to person. I kind of took it as 3 to 4 games, which would have been the Sevilla first leg, Nottingham Forest away in 31, Sevilla second leg, and then probably the Brighton FA Cup semi-final as well, hopefully back for Spurs away in game week 33. Now he's saying there's a chance for that Sevilla second leg. Well, that would be the third game since he said he was going to be out for a few games. So I don't think he's going to come back for Sevilla and play 90 minutes. It might just be that Man United really need him because obviously the tie could have been 3-0 at one point, ended up being 2-2. But from an FPL point of view, especially if you're free hitting in game week 32, if he can get minutes against Sevilla, then maybe get some more minutes against Brighton, there's a good chance that he's back for that Spurs away game. And I don't know how everyone else's squads are set up, but if he was on the bench for that game, I could bench him for FPL and just wait to have him back for that double in game week 34. Now, I know some people are of the kind of point of view that he's so important, he's going to be wrapped up in cotton wool and managed, but I'm not sure Man United can afford to do that, right? Sancho is not playing great on the left. Martial looked good last night for 60 minutes because that's all he can play. He can't do back-to-back 90 minutes. And also, one thing to think about, which I only really considered today, is that by the time, if you're free hitting in 32, by the time we get to game week 33, Man United could be out of the FA Cup because they've got injuries now to Martinez and Varane. We don't yet know how long they're out for. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But it makes that defence a lot weaker. So they might lose to Brighton in the FA Cup. And because that Sevilla result is now so finely balanced, right? It's 2-2, now they've got to go away and try and win it. They could go out of the Europa League as well. So by the time we get to game week 33, Man United could only have the Premier League to play for. Now, it could also be that they're still in the FA Cup and still in the Europa League. But if you were already wavering about selling players like Rashford, it just feels like it's a good time to reassess after the free hit. If you're not free hitting in 32, it's a little bit different. I'd probably kind of side towards selling him, especially if you're wildcarding in 33. If you can afford to get him back, I would sell him, go for a 1 or 2 game week punt, and then if you need to, you can put him back on your wildcard in game week 33. But for those of us that are free hitting, this is kind of pushing me towards keeping him because I really like Grealish, but it's just something about that move that doesn't sit right. And if Rashford's possibly going to be back for Spurs away or even the double, and Man United could only have the Premier League to play for, Rashford is someone that I want, especially for the kind of price that I paid for him. So I'm probably going to keep him. Like I say, that is not a guarantee he's going to be back, but I think the fact that he said there's a chance is kind of a positive thing. Just on the other injuries, if you didn't see, Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane went off with injuries last night. Ten Hag was asked today about how long they might be out for. And he said he doesn't know. It's not even 24 hours since the match, so I don't have complete diagnosis, so I can't tell the severity of the injuries. When we have news, we'll give it straight to you, but let's do the medical, etc., right? So first things first, if they're out for a while, that obviously weakens the Man United defence. So as a Luke Shaw owner, I am a little bit worried. I don't think it's so bad that I would go out of my way to sell him, especially when we don't know what or how long those two players might be out for. But it is a bit of a worry. Also, the last time Martinez wasn't available, Luke Shaw played left centre-back. So when everyone else is fit, apart from Martinez and Varane, it could be Dalot or Wan-Bissaka on the right. Maguire seems to be ahead of Lindelof for that right centre-back slot. And then it's Luke Shaw and then Malacia. So if Martinez is out for a while, It probably makes Luke Shaw a slightly worse FPL option, but again, I don't think it's so bad you sell him, but it would bring Malacia into the equation at kind of just 4.2 million. Now, he wasn't necessarily great against Sevilla yesterday, but I don't think Ten Hag has much of a choice, unless he's going to play Maguire and Lindelof, but we haven't seen that a huge amount. So that's worth taking note of. Just on Luke Shaw, again, Ten Hag was asked a lot today. Are there any players available that were missing, right? So any players are going to be available for Nottingham Forest that were missing before? And he said, there could be, but we have to see. We now have 2 sessions to go of training. So since the press conference, there'll be 2 more training sessions before the game. I don't know by now, but it can be that Scott and Luke, so that's Scott McTominay, Luke Shaw, return in the squad, but we are not sure. Now, he did say previously that Luke Shaw, 1, he wouldn't tell us what the injury was, and 2, he said he could be back at quick notice. So I don't think it's completely out of the question that Luke Shaw starts against Nottingham Forest away, especially with the amount of defensive injuries that are there. So if he was available to come back and Ten Hag thought he was okay, I think he could go straight back into the start 11. So I'm definitely not going to sell him now, and I'm probably going to start him this week because I think that Nottingham Forest fixture is good, even if Varane and Martinez are missing out. So that's kind of the main injury updates. Rashford, chance for Sevilla, which is in between 31 and 32. If I'm not free hitting in 32 or in wildcarding in 33, I would probably just sell him and go for a 1 or 2 game week punt. If you're on free hit 32, that's probably less of a reason to sell him, but it doesn't mean you can't if you don't want to. The only other thing I want to talk about is Bruno Fernandes, because again last night he was slightly deeper than we're used to, and it was Sabitzer that played in the 10, which he's done before for Man United, and he scored both of the goals and generally looked pretty good in that position. So Casemiro being back wasn't the kind of deciding factor to push Fernandes forward. I think we need Eriksen in the team. Now, the problem is Eriksen's been out for a little while, so he's not going to come back and just play every 3 to 4 days, every single match. So when he misses out, I think there's a good chance that Fernandes will continue to play in that deeper role. And the other problem, for us as FPL managers at least, is he's done quite well in that role. And Ten Hag has spoke up quite a lot about how well he's played when he's been, not in that number 10 or not on the right side. So what I would say is, put it this way, if I had the money this week, I would probably be doing Fernandes to Salah because I am a little bit concerned about Bruno going forward. But because I'm free hitting, I'm probably just going to give him Nottingham Forest away, hope that Eriksen plays. I actually think he will. Although he is going to be needed for the Sevilla second leg because Fernandes is suspended. So I'm not quite sure. But I've got to keep Fernandes for Nottingham Forest away. And by the time I come back to 33 after my free hit, I will have seen the FA Cup semi-final and obviously the Nottingham Forest game, and then I can kind of assess what's going on with Eriksen and his minutes and where Fernandes is playing. But it is a little bit of a worry. So those of you that have got him and you're kind of itching to sell him, I don't think he's must sell, but I don't think it's that bad if you do end up selling him either. So I just wanted to quickly talk about some possible Chelsea rotation. I'm going to start with the second tweet first of all. So Lampard was talking about the Brighton game. He said tomorrow will be an opportunity for some players that didn't play in the Champions League. So he's alluding to rotation. He of course didn't tell us which players that would be. It could be for a couple of reasons. One, he wasn't happy with some of the performances against Real Madrid. Or 2, he wants to rest some players because the second leg, which is between game weeks 31 and 32, is now massive. If Chelsea go out of the Champions League, you could almost say it's season over because they're probably not going to get top 4 in the Premier League. So massive game for them. If we then have to guess what the rotation will be, that becomes a bit more difficult. I think they could go to a back 4 against Brighton, and then one of, if not both, of Chilwell and Reece James could miss out. Now, I'm a Chilwell owner. I'm confident-ish that he will play and start that Brighton game because he's suspended for the Real Madrid game. So Lampard doesn't need to rest him. And some people might turn around and say, well, he got the red card. He was partly at fault for the reason they conceded the second goal, didn't go and get a goal themselves. He could be in Lampard's bad books. That could be true. But I also think Lampard has to balance things where you've got one eye on the Real Madrid game, but he also needs a win. If he loses against Brighton, that's 3 losses from 3, going into a game where you have to overturn a 2-0 deficit to Real Madrid. That can't be great for morale. So I hope and think slightly-ish that Chilwell will play. I'd be slightly more concerned about Reece James because he's played a lot recently and we know what his injury record is like. He will be needed for that Champions League game against Real Madrid, so he might get rested. Elsewhere, I think we all expect Mason Mount to start because we know how much Lampard likes him. I'll be very surprised if Havertz doesn't come back into the team. So if you've held on to him this long and you need him to start, I'd be tempted just to hold him for Game Week 31 and then maybe get rid later on, because João Felix and Sterling played against Real Madrid in the first leg. They were okay right at the start, but outside of that, they offered next to nothing. So I think Havertz will come in. Elsewhere, I don't think it will affect things too much from an FPL point of view, apart from the goalkeeper, which we'll talk about in a sec, because players like Kante might miss out, which I guess would mean less chance of a clean sheet. But in terms of FPL personnel, no one owns Kante or anything like that. So I think the big ones will probably be Chilwell or James, and then maybe players like Mudryk, Mason Mount, and Havertz could come in. Goalkeeper is a thing though, right? The first tweet says, Frank Lampard ponders a goalkeeper switch on Saturday as Chelsea begin the search for new long-term number one. Edouard Mendy could replace Kepa Arrizabalaga. So that is a slight concern. I think for most people, you're either wildcarding soon, in which case it's not a big deal, you can just not have Kepa, or you've bench boosted recently, or you could be doing both. You could have bench boosted and then be about to wildcard. But whatever, most people have probably got two playing goalkeepers. So it's not a great game against Brighton anyway. You can just play your second keeper if you want to. Or you could just start Kepa. And if he doesn't start, it's very unlikely he would come on, in which case your bench goalkeeper would come on. So I don't think you need to worry about it too much. It's just something to keep in mind for future transfers. So for me, I'm still thinking about doing Raya to Ederson. I could now switch and do Kepa to Ederson instead. For most of you, you can just see what happens against Brighton, see what happens against Real Madrid. If Kepa plays both those games, things are probably okay. But if Mendy comes in, then Kepa is just not a good option for the rest of the season, you would imagine. All right, let's talk about Liverpool, because more people are starting to consider them with the fixture run they've got coming up. So it's Leeds away this week, then Nottingham Forest at home, West Ham away in 33, followed by the double game week. I think whether you're free hitting or not in game week 32, you should be looking at Liverpool players this week. But if you're not free hitting, there's even more reasons to do so, because Leeds away and Nottingham Forest at home is about as good as it gets. Now, in the press conference today, Klopp was talking about Konate and Alisson, and he said Konate couldn't train for a few days, but should train today. Alisson wasn't involved for 2 days, but will train individually today. So they are both doubts going into game week 31. I don't think lots of people were considering those two specific players, but if they were both to miss out, that probably makes the Liverpool defence slightly weaker. So for those of you looking to get Trent in, that might play a part in that decision. For what it's worth, as a long-term pick, I like Trent, whether those two play this week or not. And you know going forward, they will be pretty much nailed on. But some people might have been looking at Konate because he's such a cheap price. If we look at the Liverpool squad, obviously you got Trent, who's like 7.3, I think. Yeah, Van Dijk is 6.5, but Konate is only 4.8. So if you wanted a cheap way into that Liverpool defence for a player that started, what is this, the last 6 games, he was looking pretty good, but I'm not sure I would do it now unless we get some early team news that he's starting. And the game is on, let me see when it is. Where is it? Yeah, it's not until Monday, so you're not going to find out before the deadline. So that is a little bit of a concern. The last thing I want to talk about is Klopp on Diaz. He says he's 100% ready in training. He will be in the squad. Now, he's not going to be an FPL option probably for the rest of the season, but he is going to take minutes off the likes of Gakpo, Jota, and Nunez. Even if he doesn't play from the start, right? He can come off the bench for the last 10, 20, 30 minutes, and that time is probably going to build up over the next few game weeks. So I would just be careful if you're trying to go for an attacker that's not Salah. A lot of people have considered like Nunez for the double in 34. I don't think it makes him an option you should absolutely avoid, but it does make him a worse option, because before that is 3 games to start building Diaz's minutes up, and you've got Firmino as well, Darwin, Gakpo, Jota and Diaz for 2 spots. It's just too many players to kind of worry about. So Diaz being back would put me off pretty much every other attacker apart from Salah, because he's basically nailed. All right, for everyone on a free hit 32 strategy, is it worth going from Chilwell or Gabriel to a Man City defender? And if so, which is the best one? So obviously we can ignore the game week 32 fixture. So the next couple for Man City are Leicester at home. I would say pretty good chance at a clean sheet. And then Arsenal at home, which is going to be difficult. And the reason people are looking at Man City defenders is because they've also got the double in 34 and pretty good single game week fixtures after that. So for Gabriel, It's West Ham away this week, which is maybe slightly worse than Leicester at home, but I don't think that's a bad fixture. We know that Gabriel's absolutely nailed on, and he's got good goal threat as well. And in 33, it's Man City away. So having an Arsenal defender for Man City away is worse than having a Man City defender for Arsenal at home. But I don't think it's so bad that I would worry about getting rid of Gabriel this week. Obviously, if you're on free hit 32, you don't want to waste a transfer this week. But unless the rest of your team looks absolutely perfect, I would probably just hold Gabriel and then reassess that transfer from kind of 33 onwards, because maybe something will crop up over the next week or two that kind of changes your mind. With Chilwell, it's a little bit different because although on paper Brighton at home and Brentford at home is maybe slightly better, the Man City defence is much better than Chelsea's, and there's no guarantee that he starts against Brighton either. As I've already said, I think he will, but I cannot guarantee that. I just think in 33, although Brentford at home is going to be tricky to get a clean sheet, it is better than Arsenal at home. And by 33, the Champions League will probably be over, but even if they beat Real Madrid, Chilwell won't have played in that game, and so he's going to be fairly well rested by the time they get to game week 33. So I think there's a good chance he starts that game, and even if it is just Premier League left to play for, Lampard is going to have to want to get some wins under his belt, and Chilwell is part of the first 11. So for me, and I'm in this same, I have to make this same decision. I have thought about it, but I think the risk, bearing in mind Chilwell's more attacking than any of the Man City defenders, I feel like it's worth taking that risk that he starts against Brighton and then does better against Brentford. And again, then you can reassess it afterwards. The other thing to think about, because I don't completely hate Chilwell to a Man City defender for what it's worth, is how many slots you've got free. Now, if you're on free hit 32, you might not have exactly the same squad as this, but it's going to be a fairly similar setup. And as I've explained a few times, Estepinian with doubles to come, Newcastle were good single game week fixtures and another double to come around game week 36, and obviously Luke Shaw, who I want to keep hold of. None of these can really be transferred out, so Chilwell to a Man City defender would definitely work. The only thing is, for my personal preference, let's just put Ake in for now. For my personal preference, it's to get Trent in possibly in game week 34. So then I've either got to take out one of the other players, which I'm not going to want to do, or I've got to take out Ake, who I've just used a transfer to bring in. So that is why I'm not considering Chilwell to a Man City defender myself. If your plans don't involve getting Trent, or you've got a different slot, then I think there's more reason to do it, because there's more chance of getting a clean sheet for Man City this week, and going forward they're the better option. I would just say that because of that Arsenal game in 33, it makes me a little bit less worried about rushing out to bring them in. In terms of who are the best options, the back four does look fairly settled right now. Ake, Diaz, Akanji and Stones. But of course, Walker, Rico Lewis, Laporte, they're always around to play at some point. If you've got the money, it's Diaz. I think he's 5.9 million or something like that. He's played a lot of games recently. John Stones is playing a bit more advanced in a kind of defensive midfield role. So although the back four on paper is the players I've just listed, they actually in possession usually play with a back three and one moves into midfield. Right now, that is John Stones. I just think he's a little bit more injury prone than the other two, so that's the only slight thing that puts me off him. Otherwise, if you want to save money, it's Ake, but at some point Laporte might start. So I think most of these, or all three of these players, there's 9 games left in the league for Man City. They're probably going to play, if they're not injured, at least 7, probably 8, maybe all 9 of them. So I think they're the best 3 that I would look at. Akanji is an option as well, but I don't think he's better than any of these 3. So if I was making the move this week, I'd probably go Ake to save the money. But if you've got cash to spare, just get Diaz, because he looks the most nailed on right now. All right, if we're selling Kane to fund Salah before double game week 34, which forwards do you want besides Haaland? Isn't it better to play 4-5-1 in double game week 34? Now, whether or not it's better to play that formation will really depend on how your team is set up, but also which double game week players you want to target. Some people might play 3-4-3, some will be on 3-5-2. For what it's worth, as it stands, I'm looking to play 4-5-1. So this is my team right now. As you know, if you've been following along quite closely, Salah will hopefully be coming in for Odegaard. I'm going to have to sell Kane to fund that move, and I will probably get Greenwood from Leeds just to get rid of all the money from that position to then get to spend it elsewhere. And then Chilwell, if the plan goes to plan will be Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, in terms of who I would then want to play in the double, well, Greenwood definitely benched. Watkins has Man United away that week. I don't think I would be worried about playing him, but with the rest of the team I've got, I don't need to, so I'd bench him as well. So I'd have Haaland, the 5 midfielders, as long as Rashford is fit. They've all got double game weeks. Trent has got a double, Shaw's got a double, Estepinian's got a double, and Newcastle have got Southampton at home. So for anyone that's looking to bring in more defenders and also going to keep Trippier, you might put yourself in a position where you have to bench him against Southampton at home. So that's basically my predicament. Do I play Watkins or do I play Trippier? Right now, I'd probably play Trippier. So it's a 4-5-1. And I do think forwards in general are pretty hard to choose from right now. So I actually quite like the idea of that. By the way, that's what Greenwood looks like, just for any of you that didn't know. I'd quite like having Greenwood to then spend that money elsewhere. If you've got a bit more team value, you could just go for Solanke and put him on the bench, and he's there if you need him. He's only about 5.5, nailed on 90 minutes penalties. Some people are starting to think about Martial. I'm telling you now, make sure you've got a plan B, because this guy cannot stay fit, and even if he is fit, he's going to be managed because there's a lot of games to play. If he's available for the first game in double game week 34, he's either going to start that one and be benching the second one, or be benching the first one and start the second one. I don't see him playing in both games. I do not see him getting more than like 90 to 100 minutes across a double game week. So I get why people are looking at him, because when he plays he looks great, but I would absolutely have a plan B. Then it kind of comes down to Watkins and Isak. Now, as someone that owns Watkins, I don't think there's a huge rush to get rid of him. He's playing really well. So are Aston Villa, scoring plenty of goals. Next 3 fixtures are perfectly okay for a forward, although if you're free hitting 32, I guess Brentford doesn't matter. And like I said, it's not the end of the world if you had to play him against Man United and Wolves, but he eventually will be the way that I get to Isak. And Newcastle do have some pretty nice fixtures coming up. Aston Villa away, Spurs at home. If you need to play them, it's not the end of the world. Everton away in 33. That Southampton at home game in 34. Arsenal's tricky in 35, but in 36 they're probably going to have a double that includes Leeds away, and it's Leicester at home in game week 37. So if I'm looking at the ideal forward line right now, I mean, this week it has to be Haaland, Kane plus one other. But going forward, once that Bournemouth at home game is out of the way for Kane, I think it's Haaland, a cheap forward, and depending on your team value, that's probably Solanke or Greenwood. And then Isak is probably the next best option, just because of the fixtures Newcastle have got coming up, plus the double game week as well. But I wouldn't be sat there with Watkins and be massively worried about him right now either. So why is nobody considering Salah captain against Leeds? Now, there will of course be some people out there thinking about it, but when Haaland is fit and available, likely to start, and playing a really poor defence like Leicester, he's always going to be the number one choice for the majority of people. And to be honest with you, I've enjoyed discussing captaincy over the last 3 to 5 game weeks where Haaland hasn't been such a key talking point, right? Because he hasn't doubled or he's not been in the squad or something like that. But going forward for the rest of the season, apart from game week 32 where Man City blank, and game week 36 where it's likely that Newcastle and Brighton will be the only 2 teams that double, Haaland is going to be the number one choice for most people in every other remaining game week, right? And it sucks. I know it's very boring, but it's just the way it is. And from everything we've seen so far this season, he's going to continue to absolutely smash it. So is Kane against Bournemouth at home or Salah against Leeds away a bad choice? Absolutely not. But are they better than Haaland? Probably not. And if you look at points per match, for example, because I've talked a lot recently about how Kane is very close to Haaland in terms of overall points. He's only 17 points behind, but that's because Haaland has missed more minutes and more games. If you put it on points per match, it's 8 versus 6.6, which is quite a big margin, because if you look at the difference between Kane and Tony, it's less than that between Kane and Haaland. So if both of those players are going to start against really bad defences, you're going to back Haaland over Kane, because Man City just creates so many more chances. So I hate sitting here and saying it's that obvious, but I think it is. What I will say is, if you are someone that is quite far behind an overall rank, like maybe, I don't know, like 253, 400,000 places behind where you want to be, at some point you might have to go a little bit different and back in against Haaland when the other 2 key, premium players have got good fixtures could be the time to do it. But on the flip side, I've seen this a lot of times before where people chase the differential, they fall further behind, and then they feel like they've got to go even more differential the next time. So sometimes it's just go with the obvious captaincy pick and try and pick up points elsewhere instead. So I would absolutely not begrudge you if you want to go Salah against Leeds away, a team that have just conceded 5 to Palace, or Kane against Bournemouth at home, really great fixture. But if you're asking me who the number one captaincy choice is this week, it's fairly obvious. It's got to be Erling Haaland. Alright, so who is the best one game week midfield punt for game week 33 wildcarders who are also using free hit in game week 32? So basically, they only need this midfielder for game week 31 only. The reason that there are 2 lists is because someone else asked a very similar question where they're wildcarding in 33, looking for a midfield punt, but they weren't free hitting in game week 32, so they need them for 2 weeks instead. Now, the number one obvious choice to go for is Salah, and some of you might say that doesn't count as a punt. That's absolutely fair enough, but if we're looking at the best midfielder for the next 2 weeks, it's definitely him. And in game week 32, his ownership will probably be quite high, but in game week 31, I don't think it will be that huge because a lot of us are blocked from getting him. So Leeds away, Forest at home, or just Leeds away, that looks perfect for me. So if you can get to Salah, definitely go for him. I think the next obvious ones are probably Arsenal midfielders. If you're looking for a 2-week punt, then I would get one of Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard in that order that you don't own. So if you own Martinelli, get Saka if you can afford it. If not, get Odegaard, etc. Because West Ham away and Southampton at home is pretty decent, especially for a team that we know will score a lot of goals. So that's where I would look. I think if it's a 1-week punt, you can definitely look at any of those Arsenal players as well, but it's just West Ham away. So if you're looking for a true punt, maybe that's not where you go. Maybe you don't go for Salah either, and you look at someone like Son or Kulusevski because they've got Bournemouth at home. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not looking to target any Spurs midfielders for the long term, but if you're looking for a 1-game week punt, then Bournemouth at home is certainly the fixture to try and look at doing that in, right? Son's very expensive, so if you can't afford that, go for Kulusevski. I think both of them have got a pretty good chance of starting, because if we look, I just want to double check, right? I think if we look recently, yeah, I mean, Kulusevski started the last 3 games, Son has started the last kind of 5, so they should both be fine, but I guess there's always a chance that maybe they get bench. So you could think about that. I don't think it's a huge issue or anything like that. Elise, a lot of people have talked about. So in game week 31, I'm just looking here, is Southampton away. In 32, it's Everton at home. So they're, whether it's a 1-week or a 2-week punt, you could look at him, especially if you need someone a little bit cheaper. I've got to be honest, I feel like Elise is very much a knee-jerk after what happened against Leeds. I'm not convinced this will continue happening where he gets multiple returns. But I guess if we're talking punts with the fixtures Palace have got, that is pretty decent. I've said Salah because Leeds away, Forest at home. You could look at Gakpo as well. He's much more likely to start one or both of the games over than someone like Diaz, because obviously Diaz is only just back from injury, but there's no guarantee he starts both games, so I'd probably just ignore him. Then if it's a 1-week punt, you could also look at Man City or Man United players who are blanking in 32. Sancho and Antony, very good minutes at the moment, especially with Rashford out. We could see against Forest something like Casemiro, Eriksen, Sabitzer and Fernandes off the left so that Sancho doesn't have to play. I don't think that's very likely though, so I think Sancho will start. Antony much more likely. Or probably more exciting is to go for Man City against Leicester at home. De Bruyne should start again, and possibly Mahrez will start on the right. And I think Bernardo Silva is one of the only changes there will be from the Bayern Munich game. So as a 1-week punt, it doesn't really get much better than Mahrez. And if they were to get a penalty when Haaland wasn't on the pitch, Mahrez would probably take that as well. Obviously, if you want to play a bit safer, you'd probably just go for Grealish. But if we're talking punts, I'd probably look at Mahrez instead. And I think that's about it, because most of the players on a 2-week punt are the same as on the 1. They just don't blank. I think I would ignore Spurs and Gakpo for 2-week punts, I think, because Spurs fixture in 32 is like Newcastle away, and that's just not great. So I'd probably look at Salah, any Arsenal or Elise. Anyway, let me know what punch you're going for. Alright, let's take a quick look at my team. I've put it into the free transfer planner on FPL.team. Make sure to check that out if you haven't already. I would say with Marcus Rashford, I'm like 80% sure that I'm going to keep hold of him. The other 20% is just giving myself the option to change my mind and get Grealish on the deadline stream tomorrow. But as things stand, I think I'm just going to bench him and play Solly March instead. I quite like what Ten Hag said about Rashford having a chance for Sevilla. I know that's not a guarantee. He might play 0 minutes. But even if if he does, we've still got Brighton in the FA Cup and Spurs away in 33 before I really need him in game week 34. And the only real sacrifice I'm making this week, apart from the fact that Rashford could drop in price and Grealish might go up, is playing March instead of having Grealish. So if Solly March can match Grealish this week, I'll be happy that I've given myself that extra week or two to make the decision. And even if we fast forward to 33, because I'm free hitting in 32, if Rashford wasn't back, again, would it be the end of the world to have to play Odegaard against Man City away instead of having Grealish for Arsenal at home? If Grealish had a slightly better fixture, I'd be way more keen to make the move. But if I've got to play Odegaard in 34 away to Man City instead of Grealish at home to Arsenal, I don't think it's that bad, right? Because normally, if Rashford was fit, I'd be benching Odegaard. So that's the sacrifice again that week, because I'd play Matoma and March against Forest. So the sacrifice is playing March against Chelsea in 31 instead of Grealish against Leicester, and potentially Odegaard against Man City away instead of Grealish against Arsenal. Don't get me wrong, in both situations, I think Grealish wins out, but I'm hoping with the transfer that I make, long term, it'll be more worthwhile. And I'm of course hoping that Rashford will be back for game week 34. Now, if we go back to 31 and put Grealish in, the other thing to think about is the double in 34. So I'm just going to fast forward a second. This will be the midfield 5. My plan for a long time has been to do Odegaard to Salah, and I would fund that by Kane to Greenwood. That would give me enough money to do the move. So 2.4 million left over. And this is where I would buy Trent. Let's just put this in. And I would bench these two players, right? So that's where the 4-5-1 I spoke about earlier comes in. And this would be the midfield 5. Now, to be honest, as I'm thinking out loud going through this, would it be the end of the world if I had that midfield 5 and Rashford was fit just to ignore him? Maybe not, because if Grealish starts twice, perhaps he can match Rashford. For what it's worth, if they're both fit for 34, Rashford's absolutely the better pick. But maybe Grealish could match him or potentially outscore him, and I could get Rashford back in later on. But the reality is, when we get to game week 34, if Rashford's fit, I'm going to want him, but I am not going to want to take out any of those players for a hit. So why put myself into that position if I'm not fully convinced on the move in the first place? So I think the likely thing for me to do is just bench Rashford, play March. I'm probably going to play Shaw ahead of Botman. The only thing I'm considering is whether also to bench Chilwell for what it's worth, and maybe play Botman or Estupiñán ahead of him, because I'm not 100% sure he'll start. But I don't know. I kind of think it could happen. So then it comes down to what transfer do I make? Because I've got one free transfer this week and a free hit next week. I think it's probably the goalkeeper move, which is so boring. But Ederson's got so many good fixtures and double game weeks after 32. I kind of just want to go for it for a third time and hope I get lucky. Now, the original play was Raya to Ederson and just keep hold of Kepa. But as I said earlier for Chelsea, Mendy might come in and be the new number 1, at least while Lampard's in charge. The reason that I'm still thinking about taking Raya out is he's more expensive, so it frees up more money. There's no guarantee that Kepa doesn't play some games. And if I keep Raya, the only way that I play him is if Ederson gets injured or rotated. Because once I bring Ederson in, there's not really any game weeks where I would play Raya instead. Where there are some game weeks that I might want to play Kepa. And if he keeps his place, that gives me the option. So for example, and it's not really a massive deal for what it's worth, but in game week 33, when Man City play Arsenal, I could just play Kepa against Brentford instead. Similarly, he's got Nottingham Forest at home in 36, and Kepa has got Everton away. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind playing Ederson against Everton away, but if I've got the opportunity to go for Kepa instead, I would. So I'm still, as it stands, thinking about doing Raya to Ederson, and this would be my team for game week 31. And obviously going forward, I'd have Ederson for all those doubles. So I think I'm going to do the boring goalkeeper move. I did briefly consider Shaw to Ake last night, because obviously Man United defence does look in a bit of trouble. And obviously I wasn't sure if Luke Shaw would be back this week. And maybe long term it's better to have a Man City defender. But if there's a chance he's going to play against Forest, I don't think it's worth doing. So they're the two moves I'm down to, unless I change my mind tonight. Rashford to Grealish, or Raya or Kepa to Ederson. I think that's it. And I'm probably going to do the Ederson move. He's probably going to concede with his first shot on target against Leicester. Kepa will probably lose his place. In game week 33, I'll have to play Ederson against Arsenal. I'll probably concede there, and I'll be in tears. But you know what? I'm probably going to do it anyway. So let me know in the comments below why I'm overthinking that move and what move I should be doing instead. If you've enjoyed that video, give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here, or you haven't done so already, I should say. And I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream.